Ever get that feeling like when you see something happening today and you just know there's a whole deeper story behind it?
Oh, absolutely. Like there's something more going on than what's on the surface.
Right. Like there are roots that go way back.
Mm-hmm.
That's what we're going to be looking at today, this idea of post-traumatic slave syndrome, or PTSS.
Okay.
And it was Dr. Joy DeGruy who really brought this concept to the forefront as a way to understand, I think, in a really powerful way, the lasting impact of chattel slavery.
Yeah.
And the systemic oppression, that continues to affect African-American communities.
I mean, when you think about it, it's not just a historical event, right?
No.
PTSS. It's this idea that the trauma of slavery has continued to ripple through generations.
Exactly.
And it's still shaping the way people experience the world, how they see themselves and how they interact with others.
It's like this really profound ripple effect across time.
It is.
So in this deep dive, what we're going to do is kind of explore the roots of this trauma, this idea of multi-generational wounding, and then how it shows up in everyday life.
Yeah, like what are the signs? What are the impacts?
Exactly, yeah. We're going to talk about things like self-perception.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to talk about anger and how it contributes to these inequalities like that we just see so stubbornly persisting in our society.
Right, because they don't seem to be going away, do they?
They really don't.
No.
And then really importantly, what are the paths toward healing?
Right. Where do we go from here?
Yeah. What does empowerment look like in the face of all of this?
Yeah.
So to kick things off, I think it's really interesting, this quote from Randall Robinson, where he's talking about the Maasai greeting Kaseri and Injera.
And how are the children?
Yeah.
It's such a powerful greeting, isn't it?
It's so powerful and so simple.
It is.
But it really makes you think about like how much a society truly values its future. It makes you think like if we really prioritize the well-being of future generations in that same way, would we understand and address something as deep and as profound as the impact of slavery differently?
I think we would have to, wouldn't we?
I think we would.
If we were that tuned into the well-being of future generations.
Yeah. So let's dig into those roots.
Okay.
This idea of multi-generational trauma. I think it's important to recognize that American chattel slavery, it wasn't just forced labor.
Yeah, this was different.
It was different. The sheer scale of it.
Yeah.
250 years.
And that it was legal. I mean, this was enshrined in law.
Generations were born into this system.
Lived their entire lives under this system.
And died within it.
And died within it. Yeah. It's hard to even wrap your mind around that weight of history.
Yeah, it's almost unfathomable.
And it's not just about the time, right? Because slavery has existed in different forms in other places.
Mm-hmm.
But American chattel slavery, this was something different. It legally defined human beings as property.
As movable items of personal property.
I mean, how can you even begin to process that?
It's this, complete and total denial of personhood.
Right. And because it lasted for so long, generation after generation after generation, it carved deep wounds.
That haven't just disappeared, with time.
No, they haven't.
The source material actually uses the term Black Holocaust,
mm-hmm.
or Maafa, which is a Swahili word meaning a terrible
disaster, a really significant disaster, catastrophe.
Yeah. And they're using that term to really describe the transatlantic slave trade and the devastating impact it had, which includes the millions who died during the Middle Passage.
And to put that in perspective, more people died during the Middle Passage than during the Jewish Holocaust.
Right. It's staggering.
It is.
And I think it's also really striking how in the U.S., there's been this reluctance to fully acknowledge this history.
Like we haven't fully reckoned with it as a nation. And that lack of acknowledgement, that reluctance to really grapple with what happened, that only makes the trauma deeper, wouldn't you say?
I think so, because if these wounds aren't acknowledged, if they're not addressed, then how can they possibly heal?
Right. And they just keep impacting subsequent generations in these really profound ways.
And I think, when we talk about slavery, at the core of it, there was this systematic dehumanization.
Mm-hmm.
We were saying, enslaved Africans were legally considered property.
Yeah.
And then, the 3/5 compromise in the Constitution, which literally counted them as less than a whole person.
It's just mind-boggling, isn't it?
It is.
To think that was enshrined in our founding document.
What must that have done to people's psyches?
I mean, generation after generation, to have your humanity denied in such a fundamental way.
Yeah.
It's hard to even imagine the psychological impact.
It is. And what's also really important to understand is that this dehumanization, it wasn't accidental.
Right. This was deliberate.
This was constructed. This was reinforced through laws.
Through what was considered science at the time.
Yeah.
It was a very deliberate effort to strip away any sense of inherent worth from Black people.
So, we see these flawed racial classifications, people like Linnaeus and Blumenbach.
Right, and their theories were completely baseless scientifically.
But they were used to create this false hierarchy of races.
And to justify the idea of Black inferiority.
Right.
And then you have these discriminatory laws like the Virginia Code of 1705.
Which actually allowed slave owners to kill enslaved people during correction without any legal repercussions.
It's just horrific.
And these weren't isolated incidents, right?
Yeah.
These were pieces of a system.
They were features, not bugs.
Yeah.
This was a system designed to erase the humanity of an entire group of people.
And to maintain control.
And that meant constant threat of violence, the breaking apart of families, which was just brutal.
To destroy those bonds.
To destroy those bonds and to make it easier to control people.
And then, just the ever-present possibility of abuse, physical, emotional.
It created this atmosphere of just relentless psychological terror.
Right.
Imagine living with that day in and day out, and then imagine your children living with that and their children.
Yeah. So we're really starting to see, I think, how deep these roots of PTSS go.
Yeah. This is the foundation.
Now, how does this trauma show up in the lives of African Americans today?
That's the big question.
Dr. DeGruy talks about these key manifestations of PTSS.
Okay.
The first being vacant esteem.
Okay.
What does that look like?
So, you know how a plant needs sunlight to thrive?
Mm-hmm.
Imagine a plant that hasn't gotten enough sunlight for generations.
Okay.
It might still grow, but it's not going to be healthy. It's not going to reach its full potential.
Right.
Vacant esteem is kind of like that. It's this deeply ingrained sense of low self-worth. But it's not just individual. It's shaped by society, community, and even family experiences.
They're all rooted in this legacy of slavery and oppression. It's this internalized feeling of being less than.
Yes.
And, the text actually gives this really, really powerful and disturbing historical example.
Mm-hmm.
Enslaved mothers would sometimes put down their own children.
It's hard to even imagine.
It's heartbreaking.
It is.
But they were trying to protect them.
Yeah, protect them from being sold off.
Or abused by the slave masters.
It was a desperate, horrific survival tactic.
In this impossible situation.
Yeah.
But it raises this question. Could that behavior, that reluctance to praise children, have been passed down?
Oh, I think that's definitely possible. What starts as a desperate act to protect your child under unimaginable circumstances, that can become a pattern.
Mm-hmm.
Over time, maybe it even becomes unconscious.
Right, and the children internalize that.
And the children internalize that lack of praise as meaning something about their own worth.
Right.
And the cycle continues.
And, this vacant esteem, it doesn't just stay within families.
No, it can impact whole communities.
The source talks about how it leads to conflict.
Undermining behaviors.
Within African American communities and organizations.
Yeah, the crabs in a barrel mentality.
The hater phenomenon.
Yeah, or the constant infighting, the struggles over leadership.
Right, and it's this idea that these deep-seated feelings of low self-worth can actually sabotage collective progress.
It's heartbreaking, but it's real.
It is real.
And you also have to consider the historical limitations, like how job opportunities for African Americans were so restricted.
Right. They were often confined to certain trades.
So that could also contribute to this feeling of limited potential.
Like there's an invisible ceiling that's placed on aspirations.
Exactly.
The example in the text, though, about this young Black man's attempted suicide, it's devastating.
It is.
And the fact that it was initially dismissed as gang violence.
What does that say about how much we value Black lives?
It just speaks volumes about the despair and the lack of any perceived future.
And that despair can be a direct result of vacant esteem, this feeling that your life doesn't have value.
So another key manifestation of PTSS that Dr. DeGruy talks about is ever-present anger.
Okay.
And this isn't just your everyday anger.
Right. This is different. This is deeper.
This is deeper. And it seems to be pervasive in the African American community.
Mm-hmm.
Where do you see the roots of this anger?
Well, think about it. For generations, African Americans have faced disrespect, discrimination, and systemic barriers.
Yeah.
They've been denied basic human dignity and equal opportunity.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a righteous anger. It comes from a place of deep hurt and injustice.
The source material has this anecdote about a young man in a movie theater who overreacts when someone throws popcorn at him.
Yeah, that might seem like a small thing to some people, but
Yeah.
it really highlights this hypersensitivity to disrespect.
Mm-hmm.
It's like there's this reservoir of anger just below the surface.
And even a small thing can trigger it.
Exactly.
It's not just about the popcorn.
It's about feeling insignificant, feeling like you don't matter.
Mm-hmm.
And those small incidents, they tap into this long history of marginalization.
And the text also talks about how when people face blocked goals, whether it's in their career or just trying to live their lives, and they recognize that those blocks are due to racial bias, that anger can intensify.
Oh, absolutely.
Oh, great.
It goes from being a motivating factor, this anger at injustice, to something much more destructive.
Resentment, rebellion against the system.
Exactly.
And when you connect it back to slavery,
Yeah.
where basic human rights were just completely denied.
It's like this foundational trauma that fuels so much of what we see today.
And it's still happening, this fight for basic rights and dignity.
It's exhausting, isn't it?
It is.
To keep having to fight for things that should be a given.
Okay, so the third manifestation that Dr. DeGruy identifies is racist socialization.
Okay.
What does that involve?
So racist socialization is basically the process of internalizing these messages about white superiority and black inferiority. And these messages, they're everywhere.
Right, in our institutions, in the media, in our everyday interaction.
It's like breathing in polluted air.
Mm.
You might not see it, but it's still affecting you.
Right, and it has these really deep roots in the justifications that were used for slavery.
And they've been reinforced for centuries.
There's a personal story in the text that really illustrates this. The author is talking to this young, dark-skinned man,
Mm-hmm.
and he feels like he needs to find a light-skinned partner
To be acceptable.
to please his mother.
It's internalized colorism.
Yeah.
It shows how deep these messages about racial hierarchy go, even within the black community.
Sad.
It is. And what's even more insidious is how sometimes, even unintentionally, some African Americans reinforce these negative stereotypes.
There's their own behavior.
Yeah.
Because they've internalized it.
Exactly. It's this cycle that's really hard to break.
The narratives that were used to oppress are then perpetuated.
By the very people they were used to oppress.
The text mentions that because enslaved people constantly saw the power and privilege held by white people, they may have unconsciously started to believe that whiteness equals strength and blackness equals weakness.
It's a way of making sense of a world where you're constantly being told you're less than.
Right. It's a survival adaptation.
But it's incredibly damaging in the long run.
And, we can't ignore the role of media in all of this.
Oh, the media is a huge part of the problem.
Historically, we have the minstrel shows, the blaxploitation films.
And today, it's not much better.
No. These images seep into our subconscious and reinforce those negative biases.
And they create this warped perception of reality.
Yeah.
And that warped perception feeds right back into racist socialization.
It affects how society sees African Americans.
And even how African Americans see themselves.
This is where that idea of double consciousness comes in that W.E.B. Du Bois talked about.
That feeling of always seeing yourself through the eyes of a racist society.
Like you're constantly having to negotiate your identity.
It's a burden that most people don't even realize they're carrying.
And the source material also talks about the impact of slavery on family structures.
Oh, yeah.
How families were deliberately broken up.
Torn apart.
And then, after emancipation, the ongoing struggle to rebuild and maintain strong families.
Imagine having to rebuild your family from scratch after generations of forced separation.
The disruption of those bonds.
It's a wound that hasn't fully healed.
No. But I think it's interesting, the story about the author's son in Detroit.
Mm-hmm.
Because he was able to recognize the difference between the negative portrayals of black people he saw in the media and his own positive experiences with his black colleagues.
That's a powerful example of how lived experience can challenge those harmful narratives.
Yeah, and how important those positive relationships are.
Absolutely.
So ultimately, the text connects racist socialization to self-undervaluing.
Undermining your own effort.
Internalized self-hate.
It's a vicious cycle.
It really is.
Mm-hmm.
So we've looked at the roots of PTSS.
We've seen how it manifests in these really significant ways.
Now, how does it contribute to these disparities we see in areas like education,
Okay.
employment?
The justice system.
Yeah.
Well, think about education.
Okay.
The source mentions these high dropout rates in urban high schools.
Yeah.
And the disparities in resources between schools in affluent areas and those in under-resourced communities.
And then you have the attacks on affirmative action.
While legacy admissions, where kids of alumni and donors get preferential treatment, that still continues.
Right.
So could vacant esteem be playing a role here?
In what sense?
Well, if students internalize this belief that they don't have the potential to succeed, that education won't lead to opportunities, they might just give up. And ever-present anger, that could lead to disengagement with a system that feels rigged against them.
Yeah.
And racist socialization, that can lead to lower expectations from teachers, fewer resources allocated to their schools.
Right.
It's likely a combination of all of these factors.
Yeah, it makes sense.
It does.
And then when you look at employment, we have this study. Are Emily and Brendan more employable than Lakeisha and Jamal?
I remember that study.
It showed just blatant racial discrimination in hiring.
Just based on names.
Based on names.
It's incredible that this is still happening.
And it really highlights the impact of societal bias, which is a key part of racist socialization.
Right. Those biases are deeply ingrained in our culture.
And the fact that African Americans have significantly higher unemployment rates.
And the persistent wage gap.
Regardless of education level.
It's not just about individual prejudice, right?
Yeah.
It's about a system that's been designed to disadvantage Black people.
A system with deep historical roots.
In slavery, segregation, where economic opportunities were deliberately limited.
And then when we look at the justice system, it's striking, the disproportionate incarceration rates.
African Americans make up about half of the prison population, but they're only around 12% of the general population.
How does PTSS factor into this?
Well, you have to think about the hypersensitivity to disrespect.
Mm-hmm.
Could that lead to more confrontations with law enforcement?
And then the impact of racist socialization, right?
Leading to harsher treatment, more severe sentencing. It's like this self-fulfilling prophecy.
The text mentions that repeated exposure to violence against African Americans,
even through the media,
can have a significant impact.
It can be traumatizing. And that trauma can contribute to a cycle of involvement with the justice system.
Right.
It's like this never-ending loop.
And then there's the issue of voter purges,
which disproportionately affect Black voters.
Another example of systemic disenfranchisement.
Which has roots that go all the way back to the efforts to suppress Black political power after slavery.
It's like this echo of history.
It is.
So, with all of this, what are some strategies for healing and empowerment?
Okay, so Dr. DeGruy talks about a number of things. One of the most important is building self-esteem, challenging those negative self-perceptions that we internalize, replacing them with evidence of our own worth.
So changing the narrative.
Exactly.
The source actually asks this really powerful question. Are you destroying or creating?
I love that question. It really makes you think.
It does.
It forces you to look at your actions and ask yourself, what am I contributing to the world?
And it emphasizes recognizing your talents.
And your unique contributions.
Right.
No matter how small they might seem.
And then actually engaging in actions that make a positive difference.
That's where the real power comes from.
And the text also talks about vocalizing pride in the achievements of family and friends.
Giving them that direct acknowledgement.
Yeah.
And making time for family discussions that focus on positive events.
Right. To build that habit of recognizing value.
To create a culture of appreciation and affirmation.
And then there's the idea of taking control of our inner world.
Yeah.
Particularly when it comes to that ever-present anger.
Which is a valid response to injustice.
But it's also important to learn how to manage it in healthy ways.
Right. It's not about suppressing the anger, but about channeling it in ways that are productive.
So the text suggests waiting for that initial heat of anger to subside before reacting to a situation.
To give yourself time to think clearly.
Yeah.
And then you have more choices in how to respond.
It also talks about prioritizing healthy lifestyle choices like exercise and diet.
Building resilience to stress.
And even managing finances to reduce financial stress.
All of these things contribute to our overall well-being.
Yeah.
And they make us better equipped to handle the challenges we face.
When it comes to resisting racist socialization, the source really emphasizes being critical of the media we consume.
And actively challenging those negative stereotypes that we see.
And seeking out positive examples of successful African Americans.
To counter those negative images with positive ones. To build a more accurate and empowering sense of self.
And then there's the act of telling our story.
Sharing our family histories, those stories of struggle and perseverance.
And victory.
Because those stories have power.
Yeah, and they connect us to the past.
And they help us understand our present challenges in a new light.
The text also addresses this reluctance that some might have to share those stories of past humiliation.
Yeah, I understand that.
But it encourages us to pass them down.
Not to dwell on the pain, but to build resilience.
And to provide perspective for future generations.
So they can learn from our experiences.
There's this really powerful example about connecting our material possessions to the hard work and sacrifice of our families.
To remind us that we stand on the shoulders of those who came before us.
The source also talks about the importance of returning to our spiritual foundation.
Faith and spirituality have played such a crucial role in the Black community,
providing strength and healing.
and they're often overlooked in mainstream psychology.
And then the text talks about the need for strong leadership,
In all sectors.
to provide role models and mentors,
Yeah, advocate for the community.
and to support Black-owned businesses.
Building economic power from within.
Yeah. And then finally, there's this idea of looking in the mirror
Taking time for self-reflection.
to identify any negative behaviors or responses that we've internalized.
And to make a conscious choice to change those patterns.
Yeah.
To heal ourselves and our community.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, I think it's clear that understanding and addressing PTSS, it's not a quick fix.
No, it's a journey
It's an ongoing process.
of awareness, healing, and empowerment.
And despite centuries of hardship and injustice,
The resilience of Black people is just incredible.
like, we still rose.
We still rose.
So one final thought for you to consider.
Okay.
How can this deeper understanding of the legacy of trauma actually empower us to not just survive, but to thrive,
That's a great question.
to shape a more equitable future?
And to fully realize our potential.
That's something I hope you'll continue to think about.
Me too.